I'm David Jacobs. I'm the Executive Director of the Mandel JCC, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to the Hartford Jewish Film Festival. I am pleased to introduce Sean Gagnon of Cambridge Insurance, and he and his business and his family, the Powell Family Foundation, are sponsoring the film Out of Exile and this evening's Real Talk. He's going to introduce this evening's Real Talk's panelists, Stephen Lashiver, in conversation with filmmaker Peter Stein. So, Sean, it's all yours.
Wonderful. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for the Real Talk discussion of Out of Exile. The photography of Fred Stein, part of the Mandel JCC, Hartford's Jewish Film Festival. My name is Sean Gagnon, and I'm here truly today representing Cambridge Insurance Advisors, but more importantly, the Powell Family Foundation. Part of the reason we chose to sponsor this film and bring it to the forefront was not only a passion for photography, but also a close connection to our family and really all things Jewish culture and history, particularly photography, but also my wife's grandmother's a Holocaust survivor, and we do a lot of things around education. So the blend of the photography and getting to see Peter, a little bit of seeing the clip initially when we were looking at different films and getting a chance to sponsor this is really important. So appreciate you taking the time tonight, and glad everyone's getting to watch it too, whether in person or through YouTube. I think we're recording this, so wonderful for us and proud as a family. So tonight, without further ado, we are joined by Stephen Lashiver and Peter Stein. Peter has been the director of photography on over 50 feature films, TV, movies, and documentaries, and has photographed classic cult films in various genres, including comedy and horror, as well as major studio and independent releases, and also noted documentaries. He has just retired as a professor of cinematography in the NYU graduate film program, where he serves as the head of production. He is a member of the prestigious American Society of Cinematographers, the ASC. Peter learned photography from his father, Fred Stein, walking the streets of New York, learning photography from him. Peter Stein died before photography was recognized as an art form. Peter has brought his father's work to the public and is being rediscovered through exhibits in museums around the world, and now in film, Out of Exile. Most people in Connecticut have seen freelance photographer Stephen Lashiver's work in publications such as the Hartford Business Journal, Connecticut Magazine, and New Haven Biz, as well as in corporate reports and family albums. In more than 30 years in business, Stephen has emphasized community building as a lifetime West Hartford resident. He recently had the honor of creating the Gallery of Pioneers, large-scale black and white portraits of more than 80 distinguished lawyers and judges affiliated with the UConn School of Law. Stephen holds a Bachelor of Arts in Broadcast and Film from Boston University. He has traveled all over the world, photographed architectural interiors, conferences, and scenic destinations. He has a passion of all things photography, including landscapes, aerial views, products using his technical lighting expertise. But his greatest joy comes from photographing people with his gift of making his subjects feel at ease and capturing their true essence. We hope you've already had a chance to screen this wonderful film. If not, it's still available to stream through 7 p.m. Wednesday. Tickets are available at hjff.org. Thank you for coming this evening.
Hi, Peter. I guess this is first. I just want to thank you for what you did, because you had a career. You didn't have to do this, and I just think art photography and what your father, the amazing story and what he produced, the quantity and quality of what was going on in a period where art, particularly street photography, yet alone just photography in general, was not an art form. So that's my bag. That's my joy. There's nowhere I don't go out where if I don't have my camera, I'm like, oh, it's here. So I want you to talk about that. But first, can we discuss the format that you chose? It's a story, I think most people saw it, about your father, but it's equally a story about your adventure trying to get this legacy, to get him known. And this format that goes back and forth, tell us your thinking, how you came up with that.
Well, I'm as you say, a cinematographer, and working in the film business. I always felt since I started working in films 45 years ago. I always thought, boy, you know, my parents' story, my father's story would make a great film, would make a great narrative film for Steven Spielberg. But he's done he's done that. But it would also make a great documentary. And so I've been, over the years, for 40, 35 years, always having it in the back of my mind that a documentary would be nice. I thought I would document various events as I was promoting my father's work. And so if we got a little exhibition here, or I gave a little talk somewhere, I would shoot it. And I never knew how it would be used, but it was archived. So I ended up with hundreds of hours of footage. I would interview people, I would shoot exhibitions. But when I left teaching, I left NYU, where I was the head of production and a professor of cinematography. When I retired from that, I had time and I could try to raise money to actually make the movie. And so I was somewhat successful. And you know, we made the movie. I made it with my wife, Dawn Freer, who's a film editor. And we realized that, you know, an exhibition from 25 years ago, a small exhibition at an art center and somewhere, wasn't going to be really relevant for the film. So thinking with my wife, Dawn Freer, who's the co-director and editor and writer of the film, she came up with the outline of how to do the film. And one of the things that we both had decided when we first started to make the film, I said, I do not want to be in the film. And she said, I do not want to edit the film. So I'm in the film a lot and she edited the film. So that's the best laid plans. But she really came up with the concept of how to make it interesting, because we didn't want it to be just another film of a really interesting person. We wanted to make it a little different. And what was so interesting for her, and not really for me, but for her, was my quest to get him known and to bring his work before the public again. And so that's how she wrote it, going back and forth, one sort of story to the other story. The main story, of course, was my father and his escape from Germany, and then to France, and his escape from France, and then to the United States. But then there was my story of how someone who's not involved in the photography world or the art world is able, and all the problems that he faces, that I faced, how you can somewhat become successful. And of course, my quest is still continuing. I don't know if I answered your question, but
for you to spend this amount of time, your father in the film, it said he died suddenly. You were not communicating well. You were very Americanized, born in New York, and did going through these negatives, spending this time dedicating a part of your life to that, help you understand him, give you a little, I don't know if closure is the right word, but was part of the drive to go through this tedious process? I know your mother was working on it and trying to make sense out of it. So this idea that you could go through his images, did you learn more about him?
It was an incredible experience for me, Stephen. It certainly brought me a lot closer to my father. But I think a lot of I was no different, I think, from a lot of young people who are really interested in themselves, and a lot of them don't really know what their parents do or what they went through. I knew a lot, but I just wish that my parents were alive now and I could really ask them everything I've learned about photography and his artistry, but also about the times that they went through. It was just an amazing time. And his photographs are really moving. And I mean, I've studied them and I've learned from curators what I didn't know. Because I was not a photographer, although I did certainly take photographs as a child and still do occasionally. But a cinematographer is quite different. And so I've learned a lot about what he did, and I also learned about who he was in making the film. And I mean, it's a great experience for me. And in a way, there is a circle, sort of. Making this film is a way for me to sort of thank him for what he gave me. I mean, I'm a cinematographer, and certainly part of cinematography is composition, but he taught me good taste. If you can teach someone something like that, we looked at paintings together, and we looked at photographs together. We looked at his photographs together, and he explained to me about lighting and composition and so on. And I became a cinematographer, and I love now and loved my career and what I did. It was extremely rewarding, and it was a great life. And in a way, I'm thanking him, and I'm in a way saying, I mean, in the film you see, I really wanted to be an American kid, and I didn't. My father was an intellectual, and he didn't know anything about baseball, which I was totally enveloped in, and I played stickball and ball in the street all the time, and my father couldn't care less about any of that. So and he was different from the other fathers. He didn't make money like the other fathers did. He was into his art, and more than anything, he was into, especially when he was taking portraits, he was into talking to these people who I didn't know who they were, but I knew they were important. But he would come home and talk to at the dinner table. He would tell my mother really who he had met that day, and he would just exchange ideas with them. It was not, he didn't just take their picture. He spoke with them and tried to engage with them and get them to relax and then take their picture.
I'm trying to imagine, this would be a film unto itself, that he walks into Albert Einstein and he's got 10 minutes, his secretary's going to come in and kick this guy out. Albert Einstein doesn't like photography. And tell me how you think that, I mean, that's a film right there. How did that go that your father stayed for an hour and 20 minutes? Tell me how you envisioned that might have gone down. That's
well, he ended up staying for 2 hours. 2 hours. 2 hours with Albert Einstein. Now, well, first of all, how he got to Einstein. Fred would try to find out, and he would read the New York Times cover to cover every day, and he'd read 3 books a week and 2 magazines a week, cover to cover. But a high school buddy of my father's was Albert Einstein's first assistant. His name was Peter Bergman. And so they were in touch, and Bergman asked Einstein if it would be okay if a friend of his who was a refugee, Jewish refugee, could take his picture because it would be very important for his career. And Einstein agreed because he hated having his picture taken. He agreed, but Fred was, as I say, an intellectual, and he, of course, he couldn't converse with Einstein on a physics level, scientific level, but Fred knew politics and theology and philosophy, and Einstein was a politically engaged and was very involved in Israel and religion and so on. And so they had a great time together. And every time his secretary came in, he said, no, he has to stay, he has to stay. And he ended up staying for 2 hours. But one of the interesting things is Fred did not have a lot of money. We did not have money growing up. And one of the interesting things, I looked through the contact sheets of all the pictures he took. Now, I'm going to say you, Stephen, if you went in to photograph Einstein today with your camera, you would probably take a couple of thousand pictures if you had 2 hours. I mean, 2 hours with this great man. But Fred didn't have a lot of money, and there was not digital photography in those days. And he had film, and he had to be careful with how much film he used. So he only took 2 rolls of film, or I should say 1 roll of film of 24 pictures. And I've seen them in the contact sheets. And, you know, there is this one great picture, which is an iconic picture of Einstein. But the other 23 pictures are really very, very good. And I don't know how he did it. You know, I tried taking portraits because I've met incredible people over a career of 35, 40 years. I've traveled all over the world, and I've photographed people like Jimmy Stewart and Fred Astaire, and just, I mean, remarkable people. But I was the cinematographer on various projects, and I would take their picture, but I wasn't engaging them as a portraitist or as an intellect on a level that they responded to me. I was there, you know, I would snap a picture, but I was really the cinematographer doing my job. My pictures were, I mean, they were records of who I was photographing, but they were not great pictures. So, but Fred, you know, was interested, and he did get from these people, and you could see in his portraits the light in their eyes and their thought processes.
On a separate note on his street photography, do you think with what he went through in Germany and France, that his photography, meeting people and doing that, was a therapy, and this need to produce art, even though he wasn't really making real money on that part of it? His street photography blows me away. I think even in early on, when you can see night photography was just starting to be a thing that could be done, and just having rolls of film to snap, he was coming in there early, and it's really getting composition, getting to know decisive moments. He's, you know, he's a pioneer of that. Was there some need or therapy? Was that helping get through the, do you see any of that? Do you know that?
Well, I think, first of all, his street photography, he approached it as an outsider. So it was all fascinating to him. He left Germany, went to France, and that's where he decided to become a photographer. In France, although for Americans, Europe is a place over there. In Europe, the difference between France and Germany is very great. So it must have been, you know, in the film, um, there's a quote that when my parents were in France, they were, I forget exactly how they say it. We were sort of solid, but when we went to France, we became bohemians, because here they were refugees and they were young, and Paris was a little wild, and there were a lot of refugees, and they didn't have any money, and so it was a whole different kind of lifestyle. And then out in the streets, the people were very different from the German people. So he approached his street photography, I think, very much as an outsider. And yet at the same time, he was very much into art. And I think he liked the idea of being an artist photographer, not just a photographer to make money, which he didn't do or couldn't do. In fact, one of the first jobs he thought of when he went to France with my mother was, how are we going to make a living here? And he and his friend, who had been living in France, his friend convinced him that they would become insurance salesmen.
Oh.
So they ended up selling each other insurance policies, and that was it. That's all they did. So Fred, I don't think he sold another insurance policy. So when he decided to become a photographer, an artist, in his mind at least, he had learned a lot about art in Germany and loved art, and went to, his mother bought him a subscription. You could go to all the museums in Dresden where he was born, which was a major art center in Europe with many, many, many museums. Yeah, I think there were probably 40 or 50 different museums, 26 art museums. And he would go there as much as he wanted. So he learned, and he would teach me by looking at paintings. You could see composition, you could see lighting. And so I think that was in the back of his mind, or in the forefront of his mind. And he was always looking for a good composition. But he did some, go ahead.
We are related to that. We have a question, actual question from somebody, which I think is related to what you're speaking about. And that's what makes Fred's images modern? What exactly is meant by the new vision? What are the elements of Fred's artistic language? And I think that's kind of what you're speaking of.
Well, the new vision is really, it was an experimental stage of photography, whereas painters usually had a certain way of looking at a frame and at a scene. The new vision photography, they were looking for things that photography could do well that painters weren't necessarily interested in. So they would do some strange angles from below or from above, or take little details of pictures, or like my father did a whole series of signs, just signs. Well, a painter wouldn't necessarily spend a lot of time painting a Coca-Cola sign somewhere. You know, but Fred did a whole series of signs. And there's one picture of an umbrella lying in a puddle as an example of new vision photography. Or so that's the modern part of photography. But he mixed the modern area of photography along with humanism, because that's who he was. He was a humanist. So he would, there's a mixture of the modern photography and the humanist photography in his work. So it's not just cold and distant. A lot of his pictures are dealing with people and who they were, and he didn't, yes, like in his children's pictures, he didn't or his pictures in New York, for instance. He went to Harlem, and he went to Chinatown and Little Italy, and he went to the Jewish sections in Williamsburg. He loved all that, and he loved trying to get at the essence of who the people were.
The curator worded it so well. It spoke about taking average people and making you aware of that these are beautiful people, as elegant, as I'm not even wording it well, but it was such a they really understood what he was doing. I forget how it was worded, but that he had he knew what he was doing. There was a plan to it. It wasn't random. Maybe you can speak to some of that as well. That was in the film, that the curators look over his work and they're like, and how he organized them. And it was very planned out.
Well,
and maybe that's the artistic, they're asking about the artistic language. I think that's related to that. It was not accidental. He had categories.
Well, he certainly had categories. So he took pictures of people at work, for instance. That was one of his big areas. He really was fascinated by workers. And children. He had different themes that he liked to. People at play, signs, as I said. Architecture was very fascinating to him. I'm not sure if I'm even answering your question, but he was certainly interested in people and who they were, and he started his life in Germany politically. He was very much against the fascists and the Nazis in Germany. And he wanted to be a public defender. He had studied law. And in fact, he graduated first in his class in law school. And when he graduated, the year he graduated was the year that Hitler was elected the Chancellor of Germany. And one of the first laws that Hitler passed was that Jews couldn't work for the government. And Fred was an apprentice, which you had to do. He was an apprentice in the court in order to be certified as a lawyer. And so he was fired immediately. And so he was always interested in people and helping people. That was his who he was. There's a story I like to tell about him. As I grew up in Washington Heights in Manhattan, and I mean everybody was fascinating to him. He was fascinated by everybody. But in Washington Heights, and probably all over the country, the world perhaps, we had the Jehovah's Witnesses, and they used to come around to all the apartments, and everybody I knew would say, oh, no thanks, no thanks, no thanks. They would ring our doorbell, and Fred would say, oh, come on in. And he would love to have theological and theoretical debates with them, and just explain his point of view, and he loved it. He loved talking to people.
A question on a technical question. We have another question. Today we can crop our photos. We have a lot more ability to manipulate, not even to mention Photoshop, to make things dramatic and improve the composition. And I know some of these purists, early art photographers, did full frame photography, they used to call it, where you didn't alter you printed exactly as it was. So one of the questions somebody was asking is, were his images cropped did you, which would have been you, I guess, at this point, or did he have a superb eye for framing the image before he clicked the shutter? That was the question.
Okay.
Great question.
Unlike other photographers, he believed very much in cropping. And the reason was that he could work very quickly. So he would do it in his portraiture as well as in his street photography. He would get to a spot that he knew he could crop later on, and he would just take the picture, and then he'd get rid of the stuff he didn't like. The photographers who like to use the full frame are very careful about the full frame when they take the picture, generally speaking, and that takes time. And Fred consciously knew that a lot of his art was in the darkroom, where he would crop out what he didn't like and just used what he wanted. And especially in his portraits, at the time he was making his money, which was not a lot, as I said, in selling his work to newspapers and magazines. And they were not interested in full frames of a person. They were interested in this. If they were printing something, let's say, of Norman Mailer. So that's what he would send out to magazines. But then for himself, he would print a fuller picture. So he didn't make a lot of money, but his work was published all the time in Time magazine, especially, but Time and Life and New York Times and Collier's and all the magazines of the day.
When you at the end of the film, when you got some you got to finally show the work in a big gallery, and you looked very happy. You had a smile, and the journey, I could feel the frustration in the journey. My whole career has been like that, where you think, you're going to be some this, and then you get turned down, and getting, for those people who are interested in having the work shown, going through what you went through, what can you tell people about that journey? I know that you mentioned luck. There's this whole thing that you have to do. You went through this, this quest to get this work shown, and I can tell still you're trying to get that out there. What's involved in that, and what's the art world like?
Wow.
Well, quick, I know that's a.
But, I mean, it's very hard. I figured when I started, if I could get to a museum curator or an important gallery and somebody saw the work, they would say, whoa, this is really great. And they would take me under their wing, and they'd make, I wouldn't have to work that hard. That's not how it happened at all. What it takes is, I was lucky as a cinematographer, I wasn't working all the time. So I could, especially when I retired, but I could, when I was not working, I could be thinking about promoting my father's work, but I had to really believe in it. But persistence is, the bottom line is you've got to have a great product if you're doing what I was attempting to do. And I do, and I really believe in it. And so, but I would try as much as possible to all the time be promoting his work, aside from when I was shooting and promoting myself and my work. I never wanted his work to become my career, which it is now, because I'm no longer shooting movies. And I'm thrilled that I have this, legacy of his to promote and to work with. but you have to sort of make your own luck. And the more things you try, one thing will work here, and one thing over there will work, and one thing will lead to another, or you might hit a dead end. And the more you try, you throw it at the wall, and some will stick and some won't, and you just can't be defeated by something that doesn't work. You have to have great willpower and determination.
With what you have now, do you feel like it seemed like you had that smile and the sense of pride? Are you settled, or are you still, like, where are you at?
Well, I'm miles and miles ahead of where I was when I started. What I wanted was a big museum show, and I figured you had to start with one, and one would lead to another. So we've had a number of nice big museum shows in Germany and in France. I've had a small museum show in the United States. I really want to get some major museum shows. And if one museum shows it, then the others will take notice. So it's still a struggle, but at the end of the movie, you see me smiling there. That was a big achievement for me. And making the movie is a big achievement for me. I love the movie. And I think we did a good job, and people respond to it. I haven't yet met anyone who said they didn't like it, but of course nobody's going to tell me they didn't like it. But it's a good movie. I've worked on a lot of movies, so I know where it is, and I'm very proud of it.
How does this fare? This is another question we had. That everybody has a camera now. I feel that too, that it's diluted by this, cameras in your phone. Do young people know or care about photos like your dad's? How do the young people respond to your work?
Oh, they really respond to it. Well, first of all, the times that my father did, especially street photography, well, a lot of the portraits, young people don't know who the people are. They still know who Einstein is, but a lot of the other people, Nikita Khrushchev,
Salvador Dali?
Salvador Dali, they know who he is, yeah, and even Georgia O'Keeffe, they know who she is, but the street photography, Paris in the 30s, very romantic, very nostalgic. New York in the 40s, also a lot of people respond to just the times. But the drama in the pictures, if you have a cell phone and you take pictures and so on, first of all, you as a person who are taking these pictures, you've taken thousands of them, you don't remember, oh yeah, there was a picture, back in a serious photographer knows his or her work and will remember, and it's how you approach it. I find that, in quotes, average people do respond to photography and professional photography on a very different level than, oh yeah, that's a nice snapshot kind of thing that everybody does with their cell phones. So in a way, it's lessened the import or the impact of photography as an art, in that everyone does it. Not everyone is a painter, but everybody can take pictures. But it's different, and especially the pictures that my father took, which were not digital, and had the magic of the chemicals and film, and that's what makes his vintage pictures, the ones that he made and printed himself, special and valuable. That's a whole generation which you probably won't see anymore, although some people are still doing photography the old-fashioned way.
I loved your story about, it reminded me of my own stepdaughter, who grew up with the smell of darkroom from dad's, in my case, it was a kitchen darkroom. And I think you had the same experience where you grew up with the fumes of Dektol and Fixer.
Exile and Fixer. Yeah.
Not
It
good
was-
for you, by the way.
it was great. I mean, we had a room in in our apartment that was the dark room, and I would go in there as a kid and develop film and print pictures, and it was a whole special thing that I had that nobody else in my school circle would be doing. So it was
It's so magical.
is.
Then I did it for 15, 20 years of darkroom. And when you had that tray and the image came up, I can't imagine some of your father's images popping up in it's almost goosebump when you see this beautiful thing coming up and you're watching it in red light. It's amazing. Yeah, I have one question here, and I don't know, Dave, is there anybody, Dave, do you have any?
Yeah,
Yeah.
let me just jump in because there is a question here in the chat
I
room.
knew you had, yeah.
Where can we see the photos in person? Is there a show coming up in the New York area? The last question, is there a book or a museum catalog available? The last question, is there a book or a museum catalog?
Yes.
There is?
If you go on Amazon,
Huh?
you'll see there are probably 5 different books. I should warn you not to buy the one that says 90 portraits, world celebrities and 90 photographic portraits. That's a book I did many, many, many years ago, and I wanted a book made before my mother passed away. And there was a publisher, Dover Press, and I just said yes, and because they were willing to do it, but the quality is really bad. There are 2 books that are quite good. There's actually 3 books that are quite good that you can find on Amazon. But if you go to our website, you can get those links to those books. But just look up Fred Stein on Amazon. My website is fredstein.com. And on the media page, you'll see some links to some of the books on Amazon. But there are 3 nice books. One is called, I'm really bad with names, but it's called Fred Stein, Paris, New York, something like that, published by Kara Verlag in Heidelberg. That's my favorite book. Then there's another book called Dresden, Paris, New York, which has there are a lot of essays in that book. Both books have a lot of photographs. And the last book that I would recommend is a book of children's pictures called Children, or Fred Stein Children, or Children Fred Stein. And all 3 books are published in Germany, but they're in English and German. And the children's book is really quite nice. Also, they all have essays in them that tell a little about Fred's story. And what was the other?
And what I do want to say that before everyone came on, there was a brief conversation where we introduced Peter to a picture of the Chase Family Gallery and talked about the possibility of bringing an exhibit here to the JCC. So you can all be assured that we'll be having a conversation with him soon about that, because we would love to host an exhibit here, Peter. That would be an honor to.
No, that would be really, really great. I think we can certainly make that work.
That would be great. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you find any for yourself reflective on this whole experience? Do you feel, did this enrich, how's that affected you personally?
The movie?
The whole, yeah, taking from this, discovering his images, taking them from your mother and going on this, did you learn about yourself?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things is being a cinematographer, there's a certain skill set that you have to have. So you need to sell yourself, you need to put together a reel, you need to work in a high pressure environment and be artistic at the same time as learning time management. And I mean, it's a very tough profession, and with a lot of competition and a lot of stress, and a lot of good, rewarding times shooting a good movie and being proud of your work. This is a whole different thing. And on a human level, I've grown closer to my parents and my father. I've learned so much about photography and so much about history. And I've also learned about myself in being able, like today, presenting, giving talks. I give talks about him because people are just interested in the life and the history. I mean, a lot, especially Americans, don't really know that much about what was happening in France and the, for instance, the Spanish Civil War that my parents were involved. A lot of people never even heard of the Spanish Civil War. If they did, they don't know too much about it, or it gives me a chance to tell what I know and to, I mean, I was a college professor, so I'm used to talking and teaching, but it's different. In a way, I'm learning to become an entrepreneur by selling my father, not necessarily financially for me, but just selling the, selling the name and who he was. People, I think I said this before, but what I initially came up against was, well, if he was such a great photographer, how come I never heard of him? So I have to sell him and sell the story. Once I show the pictures, and once people see the pictures, I don't have to do too much selling anymore because they really sell themselves. And I was really lucky because that Einstein picture, everybody knows that picture. So all I have to do to get a foot in the door is show that picture, and they say, oh, he did that. So that was important for him in his lifetime. That picture was very famous. So he had that on the back of his business card, Einstein. So he could go to Dali, for instance, or some famous person and say, here's my business card. Let them see the Einstein. I'd really like to take your picture. And, and that was a good way to start a conversation.
Great entree.
Very good.
Good entree.
Good.
So we're coming toward the end of our time together. Steve, there's one more question.
Yes. Do you plan to pass the photos on to your children, or do you have plans to donate them to a museum or archive?
Yes, I am passing them on to my daughter, Kate. Kate Freer is her name. She's an artist, a great talent in her own right. She does video projections. She's a designer for theater and big events and stores and museums and opera. So she's helped me ever since she was a little girl. I also have a son who is not that interested in the photography. As my sister, I had an older sister who was not that interested, so it was up to me. But my daughter totally, she designed our website. That's just a little side thing for her. And we have a site for the movie, fredsteinmovie.com and fredstein.com for the website for the photographs. She just knocked that off in her spare time. And she's very interested in the whole work. And she's actually one of our advisors. So that's what's going to happen to the work.
Good hands.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, thank you for sharing it. I've grown to really appreciate that the story that you tell, as much as your father's story is unbelievable, but your story is sweet, and it's a very heartfelt journey to connect and share this amazing art with the world. So I enjoy your smile, your adventure through it. I'm really appreciating that story as well. So thank you.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much for saying that. And it's really a pleasure. And I'm looking forward to working with the JCC
Well,
Come,
in the future.
you know,
let's have dinner.
we enjoyed this conversation together, and I know that as we put this up on our site and share it with our community, that others will as well. So thank you to both of you for joining us this evening. It was really wonderful, and I wish everybody a great evening.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you
you.
very
Thank you,
much.
Peter. It was a great film. I'm glad you made it.
Thank you.
Thank you.